Hey, sweetheart. I'm your Brooklyn mom, and today we're looking at Immortals Fenyx Rising. We're doing a review. Once again, big disclosure. Ubisoft provided me with a copy of the game. I'm not getting paid to review this, but I did receive the game for free. And again, keep in mind that I still don't agree with a lot of what the managerial staff allegedly did. Like I talked about in my previous video in Valhalla, go watch that one if you haven't seen it already. Decide if you want to support a company like Ubisoft with your wallet, okay? Okay. So Immortal Fenyx Rising was originally titled Gods and Monsters. I honestly wish they would have stuck with that title since this new one's a little silly, but it is what it is. Let's get the elephant out of the room first. This game is absolutely what would have happened if Assassin's Creed and Zelda Breath of the Wild had a baby. You got your glides, your stamina bars, your climbing, your heavy lifting, all that fun stuff. It's a Greek mythology reskin of arguably the best of both of these games. And I gotta say, it's not perfect, but I think it works. So let me explain. The narrative is simple, but it fits the game. The conceit here is that the big baddie Typhon, who Zeus locked away under the mountains, is freed. He absolutely ruins the world, captured all the gods except for Zeus, and is looking to rid the world of the gods once and for all. The Titan Prometheus, the poor guy who keeps getting his liver eaten by an eagle, you know the one, bets Zeus that a mortal can help free the gods, and if he wins, he gets released from his chains. He then begins to tell a story about Fenyx, which is who you play as. Now, Fenyx is a shield bearer with little battle experience who finds themselves washed up on the shore of this tiny portion of the Golden Isle. All the humans, including your brother, are turned to stone, and you find yourself alone on this very hostile island. Luckily, your brother had Achilles' sword, which you pick up and use to defend yourself, and that's how the game begins. I don't want to say too much more to avoid spoiling the game, but the narrative is so good. You have to rescue 4 main gods in order to fight off Typhon. You've got your Aphrodite, Athena, Hephaestos, and Ares. I don't know if I pronounced any of them right. You'll have to go with it. Now, unfortunately, they were a little different from what you might remember. Fuck off! By going through some quests and finding their essences, you can restore them to their former selves. Helping them also gives you their blessings, which can range from doing more damage with a skill to insta-healing yourself once when your health gets low. It's really cool.
Before you go, realistically, you have 0 chance. But let's make it 0.1 with my blessing.
The banter between the gods is amazing. Once you rescue more than one, they can talk, banter, and argue amongst themselves, usually referring to their lively and storied past. Now, the best thing about the narrative to me is the fact that each of the gods grow. Restoring their essences means restoring parts of themselves that they don't like. They all have to face their flaws in order to develop, which is really good little takeaway lesson. And Zeus isn't spared from this either. As Prometheus tells the story through the course of the game, Zeus interjects here and there with his little comments and his quips. He slowly realizes that he's a real deadbeat bastard of a father who's hurt his family with his brazen and thoughtless actions. And some of this was passed down to his kids. It's a lot of character growth that I wouldn't have expected this kind of game to cover. It's really nice to see. These are great characters and a nice exploration and breakdown of dysfunctional families who hurt but ultimately love each other. For the most part. Sorry, Hephaestos. And of course, Fenyx grows too. You become someone who's never really faced battle before to someone who is competent and, perhaps more important, confident. Fenyx lives in the shadow of their brother, an accomplished and seasoned warrior, so of course she's gonna feel worthless in comparison, yeah? There's a real turning point towards the beginning of the endgame where they step into their worth, and it's great. You'll love to see it. Speaking about Fenyx for a moment, you get the option to choose between a male or female Fenyx, and as far as I know, the story doesn't change all that much, if at all. It definitely seems like more of a cosmetic thing. What's neat is that either body can have a male or female voice or facial hair. It's a small touch, but one that I think a lot of people will appreciate. Look, your mother has facial hair sometimes. I'm Italian, okay, it happens. Another neat customization feature is the gear that you can pick up. You get swords, axes, bows, headgear, and armor. Now, all of these are going to have the same stats. So, for example, all your swords do the same damage, all armor has the same defense, etc. The only difference here is the perks from each piece. For example, some might let you do more damage if your health is full, or others might give additional defense against unique enemies. It's a really interesting take on creating a character based on a playstyle that you prefer, and I liked it quite a bit. Oh, and if you have the perks from an item but you don't like the look of it, you can also change how that item looks at any time. Very nice touch. Finally, one more thing about the narrative. The game doesn't take itself very seriously, and it knows it. There's little nods to other games, like the various ways that Fenyx opens the chests scattered around the world is very reminiscent of Zelda, as well as little fourth wall breaks that all but acknowledge that this is a game.
Fenyx got into the ambrosia too? Prometheus! You worried, Zeus, about losing this bet? Please, she can't use it anyway. Yet.
In many ways, it's definitely a parody of those otherwise epic heroes, gods, and stories, and it relishes in it. It works with these characters. The writers and the voice actors do a pretty good job in balancing the serious aspects with the goofy, and they do deserve praise for that. There is a very obvious plot twist that you pick up pretty early in the game, especially if you know anything about Greek mythology, but honestly, it didn't really ruin anything for me. Gameplay-wise, I'd say it's pretty solid. Once again, you get multiple choices for difficulty settings, which is always nice to see. There's also puzzle assistance and gameplay reminders that you can turn on and off as you like, just for that little bit of help if you need or if you want to use it. Your mother played on story mode since I don't have time for all this and that, I gotta get ready for the holidays. As you progress through the game, Fenyx finds and develops a variety of godly powers and skills, things like sword and axe combos, an attack dash, the strength of Heracles, and so on. I loved the variety of abilities available, as it gives you a couple of different options to tackle combat and exploration. And a quick side note, I also like how they handled arrows for your bow. They respawn after a short period of time. As anybody who's played D&D knows, micromanaging arrows is literally the worst thing in the friggin' world. So having arrows just respawn after a moment is a great touch, and it helps to keep the fight going. Speaking of fighting, I found the combat to be buttery smooth, and I was playing on the mouse and keyboard, yeah? When Fenyx first picks up the sword and you swing it in that first battle, it felt really damn great to use. You fight your usual schlubs at first and eventually have to battle bigger and badder enemies, including harpins, gorgons, and other foes from Greek mythology. I never really had any trouble fighting. Everything responded well, and it was easy to go back and forth between your arrows, your swords, your axes, and your powers. What I will say, though, is once again, it's much easier on controller. The default keys, once again, on the keyboard are a little uncomfortable, so if you're gonna play the combat, if you're gonna go through most of this game, I suggest using a controller if you can. Now, if I had to guess, I think that the game uses the same engine and gameplay concept as Assassin's Creed, which means that a lot of the issues that plague that series can be seen here. Basically, if you don't like that engine, you may not like what this game delivers. There's a lot of open world to walk, climb, and glide around on. The big difference here is that where AC feels a little overwhelming with all its side content, the amount of side content here feels just right. You can do hunting and short quests for a friend you meet early on in the game. You can explore and find ambrosia, which will raise your health if you have enough of them. You can find chests with valuable gear, and solve different puzzles for various items and ingredients, the latter of which you can use to make potions for Fenyx. And you can explore vaults, the game's dungeons, where if you pass the trials, you earn Zeus's lightning. Find enough of that, and you can increase your stamina bar. You could probably blow through the game without doing any of the game's explorations or vaults that aren't part of the main quest line, but to be honest, I don't recommend it. It's worth doing some hunting for the health and stamina increases alone. Unfortunately, not everything is rosy in the Golden Isle, and there are a couple of things that stand out as troublesome to me. If you've played Assassin's Creed, you'll know that sometimes the climbing can be hella frustrating, and sadly, that happens here too. I'd be trying to climb or orient myself, and Fenyx would flip around, get stuck on an invisible wall, or just not move, which was very frustrating, especially when you're working with a limited stamina bar. Fall damage is a thing here if you're playing in higher difficulties, and if you're not careful, you're gonna get real hurt. Your mother doesn't focus too much on graphics, so this part will be short. On the whole, I love the stylized, cartoony look. I think it was a great choice given the tone of the game, and it works out, for the most part. Sadly, some of the facial animations fell a little flat, with the character's expression not really matching the voice acting. I also encountered a fair number of glitches and graphical bugs while playing. Nothing game-breaking, but definitely noticeable, like floating or limbs clipping through walls and other things. There was one major bug that really bothered me in the game, but we're going to talk about that in just a minute. Now, this might not be a big deal to some of you, but Ubisoft does this next thing all the time now, and it bugs the hell out of me. There's an in-game store that'll be available at launch. Now, the devs say that everything is cosmetic and that you can earn everything in there free by completing what they call special in-game events, but this just rubs me the wrong way. And speaking of other content, of course, there's Day 1 DLC too. One thing that really pushes your mother's buttons is content done by the time of release being offered separately for sale. I don't know if this is the new industry standard now or what, but I friggin' hate it. Now, that's not to say that the DLC doesn't look interesting itself, but I don't appreciate having a season pass and Day 1 content being shoved in my face, especially if you're gonna go ahead and pay $60 already for the game, you know what I mean? Hey sweetheart, just a quick note from your future editing mother. It came to my attention that you can buy the season pass Day 1, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's Day 1 DLC. I looked it up, but the release schedule wasn't too clear to me, so let's assume that there isn't, in fact, Day 1 DLC aside from the cosmetic stuff. Still, my complaint about that stuff remains since I think it's an awful business practice. Let's get back to Pass Mother, yeah? Now, I mentioned some of the vaults before, and while they're engaging, they can also be a real pain in the ass to finish. Some of the vaults are just combat arenas and others are puzzles, and you can get the solution after a bit of careful thinking. But some of the later puzzles are really mind-breaking, and you may find yourself leaving and coming back after failing or falling 20 times or more. Now, this leads me to my two biggest complaints. 1. Fenyx is very, very floaty. Early in the game, you get broken wings, which eventually lets you glide across the world, and it is a welcome addition. The problem is the jumping mechanics. When you land and you hold forward on the controller or up on the keyboard, you sometimes do a little hop that propels you forward by just a smidge, which is sometimes all the difference between a successful landing and falling off the ledge. It's occasionally difficult to judge distance, and sometimes the platforms feel like you're on ice, and all of this leads to some very discouraging moments. Maybe this would have been different if I was playing with the controller instead of the mouse and keyboard, I don't know. It's something worth mentioning. Secondly, and arguably the biggest issue here, is sometimes the game would just straight up freeze on me. I'd be traveling from one point to another and the game would just stop, being stuck in a loading cycle. Oftentimes, I could just reload and it fix itself, but there were a couple of instances where I had to shut the game off entirely, turn it back on, and see if that worked, and sometimes even that didn't help. I'd have to reload a save and try an entirely different direction in order to progress. This is game-breaking, and obviously quite annoying to have to redo the progress you made, especially if you're a person who doesn't save very often or if you rely on autosave. Not that your mother does, but you know what I mean. In all fairness, I did play an early access copy, so this might be patched out before or during release, I don't know, but in the meantime, it was a big, big concern. Still, everything being said, I found Immortals Fenyx Rising to be a very solid, interesting new IP. The ending is pretty damn satisfying with a really nice final battle, and narratively, everything wraps up in a neat bow. Even with its flaws, I found the game to be engaging, entertaining, funny, and overall a really nice experience. Your mother doesn't do review scores or anything like that, but what I will say is that I recommend the purchase, even with the caveats mentioned earlier. It's a fun game, and I'm excited to see what the developers from this game do next, but please, I beg you, don't make it into a series with yearly releases, okay? Don't do the Assassin's Creed thing. Alright, that's it from me! I hope you enjoyed a little review of Immortal Fenyx Rising. I had a blast doing it, and hopefully you had a blast watching it. Don't forget to do the likes, the shares, the subs, all that stuff. It'd mean a lot to your mother. I work very hard in this video. If you really like what you see, take a look over at my Patreon and consider tossing $1 or $2 my way a month. This stuff is free to watch, but it ain't cheap to make. And if I don't see you again before the end of the year, happy holidays, sweetheart. Bye-bye.